Welcome to episode 169 of Sports Geek. On this week's episode, I chat with AFL Players Association CEO Paul Marsh.
Welcome to Sports Geek, the podcast built for sports digital and sports business professionals. And now, here's your host who loves hearing from podcast listeners, Sean Callanan.
Thanks, DJ Joel. My name is Sean Callanan, and I do love hearing from podcast listeners where they can reach out to me either on Twitter at Sean Callanan or, as a lot of you do, via my LinkedIn, as Bridget Baker did. I had a really good chat with her this morning, talking to her and helping her out with her thesis. So I do really love hearing from podcast listeners. So if you do listen, please reach out, let me know. You might be listening to it on iTunes. You might be doing it now on Google Play. Or you might be finally taking my recommendation and using my favourite Pocket Casts. This episode, what I wanted to do was to catch up with Paul Marsh. He's the CEO of AFL Players Association and formerly also at the Cricketers Association. So he's had a long time as an advocate of athletes. Here in Australia, we've just recently finished the AFL season, and what happens post-AFL season, there is a 2-week period that allows trades. So unlike leagues probably in the US that have trading terms for the whole year, the AFL has this trade week window where teams get together and some trades go through, some don't. There's a lot of rumour and news reported on it. And so it's a really difficult time potentially for some of the players as both they potentially move clubs or get delisted and free agency period. So it was a good time to catch up with Paul, both understanding the trade week scenarios from an AFL Players Association point of view, what the players are going through, then also what new players that are soon to be drafted with the draft coming up very soon. So this is my chat as part of our CEO series of Sports Geek with Paul Marsh, CEO of AFL Players Association. Very happy to be here in sunny Albert Park at the offices of the AFL Players Association with CEO Paul Marsh. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Sean.
And so, first of all, I think the first time we met, and I think I worked with you in your previous role, this is actually your second association job. You've come from the world of cricket to the AFL.
Yeah, had 13 years at the Australian Cricketers Association, which I loved. Obviously cricket's, I guess, in my blood. So I guess, I probably didn't see myself being a player association guy when I was going through university in my first few jobs, but I sort of fell into cricket when Tim May was running the ACA. Knew Tim personally. He really was running the operation on his own and was looking for someone to help him. And I worked with him for 4 years, learned a hell of a lot. And then he moved to America with his lovely wife Katie and his kids, and I was lucky enough to get the job as the CEO of the ACA, and I did that for 9 more years, and then the AFLPA came and had a chat, and I'm now been doing this for just over 3. So it's been, I've loved every minute of it. It's a great industry to work in. Very passionate about working for the players in both sports, and I think the players in our industry are pretty well placed at the moment.
And so you've really your whole career has been around as the professionalism of athletes has grown. Like I had, Nigel Smart on the podcast, and he was talking about his playing days, and when he started and when Gary Ayres came, it was the first time that players were full-time. And so in that time, we've seen both cricketers and AFL players and a lot of professional sports, definitely here in Australia, becoming more professional. How does that change, the focus of a players' association?
Well, I think, sport, it should evolve and it should continue to become more professional. So that's going to happen naturally. But I think the player associations have played a large role in making sure that happens and bringing that on a bit quicker than it may have otherwise. But, as the sports are becoming more professional and there's more money involved, it's important that the players are, properly looked after, because they are giving up, a pretty significant portion of their lives to come and play. And I don't mean for that to sound as though it's a negative, but there are some consequences of giving coming up, probably your formative years where others are working, studying, and getting themselves set up for a career. And at the end of the day, an athletic career, even the best ones, only last for a small portion of your life. So, a lot of our focus that we're putting into this is making sure that players take the opportunities that they have when they're playing, in this case AFL, so that when they get to the end of their career, they have got options that they can consider. So, that's a big focus for us. The games now, the big sports in this country support the players and the players' associations well with finances, but the player associations tend to drive the programs and services that we set up for these players to help them maximise those opportunities.
So I wanted to catch up with you this week. It's been post grand final. The focus of the AFL world moves to list management, and then we have the frenzied trade period and trade week, where there's 2 weeks of clubs meeting, looking at player lists, potentially trading players, and there's player movement. So it's a set period in the AFL, and it must be a terribly unsettling time for the players that are mentions that are mentioned in the media. Social media starts firing up. Players are either dragged through the press. What's it like from the association's point of view in supporting players through that type of period?
Yeah, I mean, look, the system's been in place for a long time. So I think, players now do come into the system knowing that, to start with, they could be drafted to any of the 18 clubs. And I think most players are pretty accepting of that. They put their names in the draft and they could end up anywhere. This time of the year, it is unsettling. And, I think we're seeing more and more that, players are looking to move clubs, and in most cases getting to the club they want to play for, which we think is a good thing. But in a lot of cases, clubs are looking to move players on. So there's a bit of stress. But like any employment situation, if your employer doesn't want you, I think it's a crazy decision to try to stick around. I think we've seen that on a few occasions in this trade period. Players who are under contract have been told by their clubs to look elsewhere, and the players, pretty quickly move on. I find that athletes are pretty optimistic in most cases, so they'll quickly look for the next opportunity. And, to someone like a Jack Watts who met with Port Adelaide were very positive about what he could offer the football club. And having spoken to Jack, that that made him feel good. He saw the opportunity there, and he's willingly now moved his life from Melbourne to Adelaide to take up a new career. So it is stressful, but so they're optimistic. They move on. There's potentially a premiership around the corner for someone like a Jack Watts. So it's an important part of our year really is being able to offer advice to players and agents as they're going through that, and we get a bit of that. But also, we spend a lot of this time of the year dealing with players that are coming off contract and actually helping them with the whole transition phase, which is a very, very difficult part of an athlete's life.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's the part that comes, post that trade period where the clubs then decide the list and decide who they're going to offer contracts to. The Out of Sanctum podcast did a great conversation with Mitch Brown on his experience, last year in that they're sort of waiting to see what the club does, and now, then get delisted, and then what's next. So you've now got this period of either players in that uncertain time, or like the Travis Cloak, come see the end of their career and say, well, I'm going to retire and this is where my career transition starts.
Yeah.
And that's a big part of what you do at the AFL Players Association?
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think there's an acceptance within the industry that, the AFLPA needs to take the lead role in the transition phase, because the reality of it is, and this is not a criticism of the clubs, but they are very sort of future looking. So they'll move a player on, they'll bring another player in to replace him or her in the case of the AFLW, and they're going to put their energy and their attention into the players that can help them going forward. So we have a really important role to play in that we are the body within the industry that will then pick them up and will work with them not only whilst they're transitioning out, but as they become past players. So we have 3,500 past players that are members of the PA, and that's a focus for us as well. So a really important time. I don't think there's a more important time in a player's career than when they're transitioning out. And, we've got good programs in place. I still think it's evolving. There's more we can do as an industry in this area. But, it is, we've heard other athletes around the place talking about, as an athlete transitioning, you die twice. You die when you leave the sport, and then obviously you die when you die. So I think that's probably over dramatic, but it is a huge thing when their identity in a lot of cases is attached to their sporting career. So when that finishes, a lot of athletes become lost.
And it is the fact that, you know, since the age of potentially 17 or 18, their life has had so much structure in that, you know, their club said, you know, turn back up at this time, be able to run this time, you know, eat these things, you know, and there's so much structure in what they're going to do. And then they go from that to no structure whatsoever.
Yeah, and I think that's a significant issue. I mean, I think sports become, we talked about professionalism a few minutes ago. I personally think it's gone too far, and I think players now, it's just too much structure. They're not able to think for themselves, and they have this completely regimented life for, you know, a good career might be 10 years, but at the end of it, they become lost because they don't have that structure anymore. They haven't been taught to think for themselves. And, you know, at the end of the day, there's a feeling that no one cares for them. So they move on. You know, we provide them with a lot of services and options so that they can study. We pay for study for them. We give them ability to talk to people about careers they may be interested in. But at the end of the day, they've got to then do it for themselves. And I think sport may need to just sort of shift its focus a little bit whilst they're playing. I think they need to be more responsible for their own decisions, because it's going to help them in their later life if they are owning their lives. And I think, you know, we have moved away from that in this era of professionalism.
Yeah, so there seems to have been that bounce back. You know, your partnerships with universities like La Trobe in getting athletes to say, well, you've got that one day off, or you've got that time off. Put that time into study. Start thinking about what that post career move is down the track, even if you're not going to do that role, like the doing of university and the learning process and trying to figure out what you might do after. That seems to be happening earlier. Like the younger guys coming in seem to have a bit more of that plan in place, and that's getting drilled into them a little bit more.
Yeah, it is, and I think there's a big focus on you know, what we call an action planning tool, and it's bigger than career. It's about, you know, sort of breaking their life down and saying, okay, what are all the things that are important here, and what are we going to put in place as a plan so that when you do get to the end, you do have something to do. And I think, you know, having worked in sport for such a long time, what I saw initially was a sort of general focus that just do something.
Yeah.
And I think we've moved away from that now. I think what everyone's looking for is do something that you're passionate about. And that's bloody hard to actually, you know, that's hard for any of us to go, you know, if I was going to stop doing what I'm doing today, what else would I be passionate about that I can go and make a career out of? And I think, you know, when you look at an AFL career for an AFL player, for example, a player said to me recently, you know, you spend probably 20 years of your life honing these skills to get to the top of your game. You're one of the best in the world, and then it all finishes. And those skills that you've developed, unlike a lawyer or a doctor or a professional, you never use again. So you've become an expert at something, and then you've got to drop it and you've got to go and start again, and it's bloody difficult. And I think for any athlete to go, I want to now do something that I'm going to be as passionate about as what I am about my football or my cricket or whatever it might be, is a genuine challenge. So to me, that's sort of the thing we've got to keep working on, is giving these guys and girls as many options so they can find something that they're going to have some passion for, and then they'll go and attack it, because they work hard. They've got all the attributes you'd be looking for in someone you'd want to employ.
Yep.
But you've got to find something that you actually want to get out of bed every morning and do.
Yeah, and it is that going from the pinnacle and being, you know, elite at your level to, you know, starting at the bottom. I think Chris Judd wrote a really good article this year about, you know, in a corporate role, and he'd never used Excel as a 30-something year old. And, you know, Nick Holland was the same, talking to him in his post-career, you know, as a first-year lawyer and doing all those jobs that a first-year lawyer did. But he found his passion. He was passionate about the law and doing that kind of thing, and was willing to do it. But it is, you know, terribly humbling to go from, you know, out there playing in front of 50,000 people to doing the jobs of that first year person. So
yeah, no doubt,
it's definitely something that they have to tackle. So then the other part of the equation is, as you know, looking forward, we've got the draft coming up. You know, with the 17, 18-year-olds coming in but nominating to be drafted. Where does the interaction start with the AFL players, with that group of players? Does it start in the junior ranks, or is it as they nominate? How do you start having that conversation, looking after them?
It's a good question. I mean, maybe to give you some context here, the members of the AFL Players Association, that starts when they become onto an AFL list. So, but we acknowledge that they will make some decisions before they get onto an AFL list that are important. So they'll choose an agent. They may make decisions around their finances. And we have sort of taken a strategic decision over the last couple of years to try to at least have some interaction with those potential draftees and their parents before they come into the system. So there's a few things we do. We get around to some of the carnivals and we'll talk to groups of players just to give them an introduction around who we are, what we do. These are some of the considerations you may have if you're choosing an agent or whatever. So that's probably the starting point. We have a lunch every year on the day of the draft. So the AFL will invite the top draft prospects along. We'll have a lunch with those guys and their parents, and we'll once again to talk about the PA and what we'll do from there. As soon as they become drafted, we then have an induction program for first-year players. So that goes for the full 12 months. We have a full 2-day camp as well we run with the AFL. So there's a number of touch points that we have as they're coming into the system. But as you can imagine, it's all new to them and there's a whole lot of stuff that they've got to take in. So it's a challenge, but I think it's just important trying to get to them as early as possible before they start making decisions that are going to be significant decisions that will impact their careers and their lives.
Because I think it is sometimes, as someone who's, I've done the induction session with the AFL player a couple of years ago with the young guys, and also done player training at Clubland. But sometimes I also feel that there's a bit of, everyone goes, the player, that's their problem to a certain degree, because the club can do a whole bunch of stuff with the players, but there's obviously restrictions around their additional services agreement and the things that they can do. So they potentially say, what they're doing on the digital space, we can't do too much, because if we're seen to do too much, people will ask questions. And then the league sort of says, that's the club's issue. And the club might say it's the agent's issue. And it's a little bit, sometimes they're left by themselves because everyone doesn't understand some of those pieces. And is that sort of where it's tough, but the AFLPA has to be try the best to catch those situations and players in those situations where everyone's trying to pass the buck a little bit?
Yeah, it's probably been historically a fair assessment. I think one of the outcomes of the recent collective bargaining agreement is, I guess, an aligned approach to player development. So we've asked the AFL and the clubs have all recognised that for us to get optimum outcomes here, we all need to work together. So we've just formed a governance committee that's made up of, I'm on it, other people from here, players, AFL representatives and club representatives, and we're at the moment developing a strategy so that those sort of gaps that you're talking about don't exist. We understand that we all want players to have the best AFL careers they can have.
Yep.
We all want them to have this non-athletic identity and transition out of the game as well as they can, and behave well. I mean, I guess that's one of the things the industry likes to see as well. So I think for the first time this industry is getting on the same page around this player development piece.
Yep.
And that comes from when they start their careers, throughout their careers and as they come out the back end. So I'm actually really optimistic about, the direction that this is going. We have a really important role to play, and I think, don't take this the wrong way, but I don't think anyone's got a greater vested interest in the players' well-being and development than what we do. The reality of it is that the AFL and the clubs do care about that, but they have slightly different sort of primary objectives. The clubs want to win games, and we understand that. The AFL wants a successful competition, and we understand that. We are here solely to make sure the players are looked after, and that includes when they become past players. So I feel really good about the direction that we're starting to go in player development. It's probably going to take a year or two, but hopefully the gaps that you've seen won't exist going forward.
And that strategy is sort of underpinned the fact that now you've got the CBA in place. You've the players are united. You've got the deal that the both the AFL and the clubs have remunerated the players, but also on this shared vision. So now your focus becomes more around that player development and that whole player career rather than the 4 or 5 years or the 10 years or the 15-year career that they might have. But you're taking, that longer approach because you've got the past players also to be thinking about. Yeah,
I think so. I mean, I think, the primary role of the Players Association is to advocate and to negotiate for the collective, and but that doesn't happen every year. And we've done a 6-year deal for the men. We still need to do a CBA for the female players. But an outcome of the most recent negotiations is a partnership, which I think for the first time the AFL industry and the players are in a genuine partnership. So we're incentivised now to help grow the game, directly incentivised, but also to put these sort of programs in place. So we are genuinely working together with the industry. And there will be some issues along the way. I've got no doubt about that. But the focus is really heavily around player development and things like mental health, career transition, financial management, the media. They're the sort of things that are coming up time and time again for the players that we need to attack as a collective.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is that we'll start seeing, going forward. Again, Travis Cloke talked about it in his retirement. Is that the impact of social media, on his career and having to deal with that type of feedback. And we've gone through this phase of players, around the world that have grown up as these platforms are developing. And, I've both done training with players and done one-on-one stuff with players. I remember when Kurt Tippett moved from Adelaide to Sydney and he wanted my advice. I said, that's easy. Just delete the apps and don't look at them for a couple of days.
Yeah.
But now you've got guys coming in that have, that will be called digital natives. The kids coming in now that they don't know a time before these platforms. Yeah. But you're also getting players becoming their own, media channels and that kind of thing. You're seeing all of the new media outlets, the Players Inside, all of those kind of things. It's something that, from a media point of view, players are starting to realise there's a bit of power, but also need to figure out how do they manage it. That's changing now with the younger guys coming in.
Oh, absolutely. And I think the digital native point is the right point. And I think one of the things too is that athletes from all sports have to give up so much to pursue a professional career. I mean, you've got to live an incredibly disciplined lifestyle. Whilst I was listening to one of the potential draftees in the radio this morning who's just finished school and he's foregoing school this week. There's those sort of things that players give up, and social media is something that every one of their friends is active on. So to give it up I don't think that's necessarily the answer. But to work out how you're going to be smart in that space is important. But as the point you also made, this is an opportunity as well for any athlete. I saw a stat the other day that suggests that the total number of social media or Twitter followers in the world, if you broke it down by athletes as one industry into sports, into media, the athletes are about 80% of the followership. So it's a huge opportunity for them. But it's also a distraction. I know there are coaches who think players shouldn't be involved in this, but this is the balancing act. And I don't think just prohibition, which has never worked for anything, is the way forward here. I think it's about education. There's also an element of, if you want to play in that space, you've got to be prepared to be criticised. And we've got to build up those resilient skills to go, look, the people that are having a crack at you here are probably, have not that many brain cells between them. So who cares what they say? So I think there's still some work to be done, but it's important that we don't hand over too much control and power to the people who are the keyboard warriors, as they're called.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the trolling issue and that kind of thing is an issue, and there's definitely tactics around it, but all the trends, what you were saying, right, all the trends are that more and more fans are following the players and the players first, and they want that insider access to the players. And so I think that's where that next piece of commercialisation potentially is, as those assets become just as powerful as their name as a brand. I think that's really advantageous. I think one of the platforms I think a lot of players underplay, because they, as a player, when you're around, you meet a lot of people, you get a lot of people patting you on the back, and you go to a lot of corporate functions, a lot of people hand you cards. A lot of the guys I say is set up LinkedIn and just connect, but you don't have to be out there promoting everything you're doing, but connect with everybody you actually do meet with.
Yeah.
Because you can get to the end of your career, however long it is, and you might have 2, 3, 4, 10,000 people that are following. And so then when you want to launch your next thing or do something, you'll be surprised how much of that network is ready and willing to engage. So if you're trying to put a bet on which platform makes sense, even just from a passive, I'm always telling AFL players, set it up, leave it there, let all the invites collect, and then one day a month you can go through and add them all. Yes, you'll still get people messaging you and all of that kind of stuff, but I think the value, down the track when you start saying, oh, this is my story, I'm interested in finance, or I'm interested in education, as you find that passion point, people can start learning and understanding you as not so much a footballer.
Yeah, look, I agree. And I think, without getting into, which platform they should or shouldn't be on, I think it would be it would be silly not to be, understanding it and embracing it, but also, making decisions as to, what you might put on these platforms. I think one of our key mantras is, take the opportunities that present. And one thing I do know is that the athletes never have more currency than when they're a current player. And so, to leave it to the end is too late, and that's something we work very hard with the players on, is take these opportunities. It's not hard to be nice to people. When you go to a corporate function at your football club or with the AFL or with us, don't look at it as a pain in the arse. Actually go and meet people because they want to talk to you. You never find it easier to talk to someone than when you're an AFL player or a cricketer or whatever it might be. So, I've seen a number of great examples of players in both sports who do this well, and they're the ones that typically transition well. So, I think I'm a big believer in athletes sampling as many things as they can sample, because that'll help them find what they might be passionate about, and then use the contacts that you've made to get some work experience, or that might turn into a part-time job, or it might turn into a speaking gig that turns into something else. And, it's not rocket science, but it's opening yourself up to the opportunities rather than closing down.
Yeah, definitely. So going forward around the draft, and with the new players coming in, what's the main focus? As I guess you're moving into the off season, but there's footy's now 24 months a year. That would be really ridiculous.
Feels like it at times.
It does feel like that, but 12 months a year, because you've got the draft, and then soon after that the AFL women's. Is there an off period? Is there a down period for the AFL Players Association, or are you really in planning mode for next year?
We are in planning mode, not only for next year. We're right in the middle of putting a 3-year strategy together. So there's a lot of work going into that, and it's a good time having the main CBA done to be looking forward. But there isn't really an off time, and I think there are times that can be busier, and often that's because of something, a major project like the CBA. I mean, we had obviously 4 years of Essendon, which was all on top of our day-to-day work, but it's a pretty issue-rich industry, so there's always something popping up. And in the last few weeks, we've had the Richmond issue, we've had the Hannah Mounsey transgender issue. There's stuff happening all the time that we're involved with, and I think we've got closer and closer to the players over the journey, and therefore there's more and more players who will contact us on issues. We're going through a process now of sitting down with every player that's been delisted. So there's about 120 of those that our guys do one-on-one sessions with to plan where they're going to go next. We've got a wellbeing department here with 2 in-house psychs who players contact constantly, male, female, and past. So there's a heap of stuff that's going on here day to day, every day. We're trying to set up our commercial business as well, so we can fund a lot of these things. So look, it's a busy place. We run on the smell of an oily rag, and but we've got a really fantastic, passionate group of people here who look after the players as best they can.
Because, having that long-term strategy and setting that in place and trying to chase that down is the right way to go. But the difficulty is, in a media-hungry town as Melbourne, that are always looking for stories and controversies and the players are the source, how much is that, getting that balance right of being in firefighter mode around particular issues, but saying, well, we want to stay the course, these programs, these developments, these commercial deals that we put in place can help mitigate that risk and lessen it. How do you balance that as a CEO and sort of direct your team?
Oh, you got to balance it the best you can, but I think you've also got to be realistic. I mean, if the Essendon issue, for example, I wasn't here when that started, but I was there for the back half of it, and you just have to be realistic. You can't do everything, and when something like that happens, which was completely unforeseen, but probably took up 3 people in here full time dealing with it, as well as a lot of my time and others. The reality is you can't do everything you might want to do, but it doesn't mean you drop it. It means you probably push it back. And I think our board is good and realistic in that it understands that sometimes these things will come up and you just have to deal with them. So you've got to take a sort of fluid approach to it rather than be really fixed in where you're trying to go. But I still think that you don't lose sight of where you want to go, and when there's opportunity presents to to plough a heap of time into something because it's a bit quieter, then you got to take that opportunity.
So some advice. What's your advice to the young footballers that are just starting there, that have either just been drafted in AFLW or will be drafted in the upcoming AFL draft? What's your advice to those young footballers?
Oh, God, there's probably a few things I'd say. I mean, I think the first thing is, you've obviously got to where you've got to because you're a good footballer and, hopefully you're a good person and don't lose sight of who you are. I think that's the first thing I'd say. Don't lose touch with your family and friends because they're the ones that will be there for you in the difficult times, and there will be difficult times through your AFL career. I mean, whether that's homesickness because you've had to move home or selection, injury, whatever. So don't lose sight of that. Maximise your opportunities is the big one. There are so many opportunities in this industry. The people that you're going to meet, the senior players that you can learn from, the external support that you can get. And if you open your eyes to that and you embrace it, it'll put you in such a better position to be a good player, but also post-career. And the guys that do the best, guys and girls that do the best in sport are the ones that are balanced, that it's not just about footy. Because if you attach your whole identity to how you're playing on the field, the reality is you're going to have some bad games and, that's going to really play on your mental state. But if you understand that you're more than just a footballer in our case, then you give yourself a chance to, okay, you had a bad game, move on to next week, but I'm going to do my study, I'm going to do my work, I'm going to be with my friends and family. So, be balanced, take the opportunities, don't lose sight of who you were that got you there in the first place.
And what's your advice of the players that are transitioning out and moving to that, that second phase of their career that's, 30, 40 years of potential work or opportunities in front of them?
Well, the advice we give at the start hopefully puts them in a position so that they do transition well. I mean, it's really important for me that they do take those opportunities. But if they get to the end and that's a difficult time from a work perspective or whatever, I think you just have to, bit of what we talked about before, be realistic. The reality of it is that you may not earn what you've just been earning, and you have to actually embrace that. But still, try different things. I mean, look for your passion, and the best way, in my view, to find that is to try as many things as you can until you start to find that. So, once again, hit up your networks, hit up our networks or your clubs. But keep looking for things that you think are going to get you out of bed in the morning, because I think that's the most important thing.
And I think they're also, I think now the job market just overall allows more, what me and my mates call career surfing, jumping from job to job. Like there's more people doing that now, whether, going from, one profession to another profession, taking that, transferring that skill set and saying, this is where I can apply. And like I said before, they're hardworking, disciplined, follow instructions, have all the, leadership skills. They've got all of these skills that they've used in footy that is applicable in potentially in other industries. So I think they can take some, solace and inspiration from people doing that anyway, that they can make that jump from, professional football, elite athlete to whatever they want to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And, and add to that, athletes are unbelievably good at taking feedback as well, So, I mean, the way that the way they interact with their managers / coaches is you wouldn't see that in the normal workplace. So you've got pretty resilient in work terms people who thrive on feedback. So they've got all the hallmarks of a really successful employees. I think the biggest challenge is for the athlete is to find something they actually want to do.
Yep.
And if they find it, and there's so many good examples of them, once they find it, they're all in and they'll work bloody hard for you and they'll produce results. So I think there's probably they're coming into the workforce in many cases 10 to 15 years behind the people they went to school with, which is a challenge. But we ask employers to invest in the potential of what these guys can bring to the table.
Yep. So I want to finish with the closing five. Do you remember the first sports event you ever attended?
Oh, God. Well, my old man played cricket for Australia and Western Australia, so I dare say it would have been a game that he was involved in, but in answer to your question, I can't remember what it would have been.
Somewhere, but maybe
the
something
Wacker
at the
ground
Wacker.
somewhere. Yeah, no doubt.
And what's the first app you open in the morning?
Depends if I've got any notifications, but if I didn't, it would probably be, I check my emails before I check anything. Is that an app?
Yep, that is an app. That is an app. You would have gone, in your cricketing career and also in footy, you would have gone a lot of stadiums. Do you have a go-to food at the footy or a favourite food memory? Have you ever been somewhere where the food's been amazing, or do you just have a go-to food that you go to every time?
Good question. My favourite sporting event I've ever been to was the US Masters Golf. I'm a bit of a golf nut, and so that was an unbelievable. It's not a stadium, but what they did have was 1970s prices for beer and for food, and they had this unbelievably good pulled pork barbecue sandwich that I'm almost prepared to pay the money to go back to Augusta just to have that again.
Yeah, you had me at pulled pork. A bit like Homer Simpson when someone starts talking about pulled pork sandwiches. Is there someone that you either read or follow or keep an eye on, and you like their material, or potentially a player that's doing great stuff that the listeners should be following and checking out that you would recommend?
Yeah, there's probably a few. One from my sort of cricket days, I love Gideon Haig's work. I think he gets the game, he gets the history, and he writes brilliantly. There's a sports writer from the States who's written a number of books called John, I think it's Feinstein.
Yep.
And I love his books. I think he's just got a new one that's come out. I think, in terms of sort of football writing, there's some really good writers. I think Chris Judd's doing a great job in some of the columns he's writing. I think they're always thought-provoking. I think Tim Boyle does a good job. Greg Baum in my mind, is a good journalist in terms of, he writes sort of colour pieces. So I enjoy reading all of those. I actually like Caroline Wilson. I think as hard as she can be, I think she checks her facts, her stories. She does her homework on them, which I respect.
Yeah, definitely. Last but not least, I get people to nominate their MVP in terms of social networks. Now, you can answer this either as Paul Marsh, CEO, and what's your favourite social network, or you can answer it from the point of view of the AFL players. But do you have a personal preference if you're lining them all up, the Facebooks, the Twitters, the Instagrams, the LinkedIns? Is there a favourite of yours?
I probably would use Twitter more than anything. I actually find it a really good source of news and also of articles. I think there's some pretty interesting stuff if you're following the right people. I probably Instagram's something that's good to keep in touch with, family and friends, and Snapchat, believe it or not, is one of those things a number of the the crew around here are on, and there's always a few laughs going back and forth through there. So I've taken an attitude probably 10 years ago of getting onto these platforms so I can try to understand them. And I think it's important that, in my role, I do have an understanding of what's going on, because the reality is that all of our members are on these platforms. I'm getting comparatively older, and I think it's important that I try to stay contemporary with that. So, I understand most of them, I think, but probably for me, Twitter delivers the most value.
Yeah, I do think that is important, at least to be on the platforms. It doesn't mean you have to be using them, but especially in your position, with so many athletes, yes, they're using Snapchat, as that young generation is, primarily as a messaging platform. They're not doing a lot of public stuff on their Snapchat, but they're using it for the back channel conversations. I'm seeing athletes using more, leaning more into Instagram more and more, because there's less of that in-your-face trolling. You don't have to go and read all the mentions, and they're doing some stuff around limiting that kind of stuff. So it is, again, easier for them to use. I think it is definitely a platform that continues to grow. And the fact that we keep seeing an article every time Dane Swan and Dustin Martin share an Instagram pic and it becomes an article, it's sort of the reason why the media is watching and it becomes content.
Yeah, no doubt. I think that's the world we live in now, that it is content. And, there are a lot of articles we're seeing now that are referencing stuff on Twitter that, I'm not sure there's a lot of fact-checking going on there. So, I mean, look, these platforms are here to stay, let's be honest. So I think we've got to embrace them and understand them. But, we'd also like to keep working with those platforms to see if we can make them a bit safer place, because they are having an impact, as we touched on before. So, it is something that I'm not sure what the answer is here, but the players, in my view, are not going to stop using them. And I think one of the things I didn't say before is the journey of I think, an athlete, look at an AFL player on social media or their career, is it all starts so positively. So you get drafted, you start playing games, and it's all good. And then the expectations get to a point where they want you to play because you're getting paid well or because you've shown potential. They then start expecting more from you than perhaps what you produce, and that's when some of the hate comes. And I'm not sure that the players have such a positive experience to a point, and then it becomes this thing that, Jesus, I didn't see that coming. So I'm not sure what we can do about that. I think that's one of our great challenges is to how do we keep the players involved in this space, because I think sport would be worse off for not having them there. But how do we protect them a bit better so that, it's not causing the issues that they're causing?
I think Adam Cooney did some really good articles earlier this year talking about the addictiveness of that positive feedback. Every time you go, you had your first couple of games, you have all this positive feedback. So you go, this is awesome. All these people patting me on the back. But you're right. And then at some point, whether it's just one pool game or whatever, it turns and it's unexpected.
Yeah.
And I use I use Olympic athletes as the real example, because they get it in a short form. The poor Australian swimmers that had a first good couple of days, and they were potentially reading it and getting a bit of their head wobble and going, how good are we? And then it turns like 2 days later. And then it's, social media is to blame. And it's like, they were getting that, the experience that a footballer gets over a season over like 5 days. So I can only imagine the emotional roller coaster they go with. So it is a bit of, take both sides with a bit of a grain of salt. You can take the positive, and then if the negative's going to be there, and I think Adam Cooney wrote it, he knew it was going to be there.
Yeah.
And so it's like, well, you choose when you go to consume it.
Yeah.
Is probably the piece.
Yeah, and I've had conversations with some of the footballers who know it's going to be there when it's negative and go there as a form of punishment. If they've had a bad game, they'll actually go there to punish themselves, which is really concerning for me. But that's what we're dealing with here. And part of me thinks, okay, they need to live with that. They need to learn how to deal with it, because it's going to be part of their careers, no doubt about that. And don't give ownership to the people that are writing that about you. I mean, that's at the core of it. We all cop criticism. I cop it constantly in what I do here, but you can't allow that to overtake the direction that you're going, or your state of mind. Otherwise, it's going to get you.
Well, thank you very much, Paul, for coming on the podcast. Where can people find out more about the AFL Players Association, and where can they connect with you and the AFL Players Association online?
Yeah, well, aflplayers.com.au, jump on. I mean, one of the things our site does is there's a lot of really good behind-the-scenes stories and video. So jump on. We'd love to hear what you think of what we're doing. We're on all the platforms, so give us a like on Facebook and follow us on Twitter and Instagram. So it's, all AFL Players. So, love to obviously get as many people behind us as you can. You'll find some really behind-the-scenes stuff from the players, not just about their footy careers, but their lives in general.
Well, thank you very much.
Thanks, Sean.
Want to chat with Sean? Book a time for a call. Go to sportsgeekhq.com/phone call. You're listening to Sports Geek. Send us a tweet at SportsGeek.
Thanks again to Paul Marsh. You can send him a tweet to tell him that you have been listening. His Twitter handle is Marsh_Paul. Send him a tweet if you've got any questions, either about AFL players and the advocacy that they're doing in the space, and some of the training and things that they're doing, some of their initiatives. Or you might even actually have a cricket question for his experience in the cricketing industry, or maybe just on his heritage. For those of you who don't know, and Paul mentioned his dad briefly in the interview. His dad is one of Australia's cricketing legends, Rod Marsh, a famous cricketer from the 70s and 80s, wicketkeeper for the Australian Test team, formed a famous partnership with fast bowler Dennis Lilly. Bowler Lilly caught Marsh was many a dismissal in the 70s and 80s, and so my first memories of cricket would have been of Lilly and Marsh. A bit of an update of, what's been happening and what I've been up to. If you've been following my socials, whether it be on Instagram or Facebook or LinkedIn, you would have seen that last Thursday night I performed stand-up for the very first time. I took part of a course, the School of Hard Knock Knocks, and very thankful to Ben Horowitz and Maury Morgan who run the course. It was very much a crash course in comedy. Why did I do it? And I've had a few people asking me. It was pretty much just to challenge myself. I obviously do keynote speaking and run workshops. I've previously done an improv course, and I think that all helped my keynote speaking ability and MC work that I occasionally do, or moderating. And so I wanted to, challenge myself to see how I could go in the form of stand-up. Now, it was Saturday. I got an email saying, get ready for class. It starts tomorrow. Come with 2 minutes of material. I didn't read all the emails coming up, so I didn't have 2 minutes. So I had to sit down over a coffee and write. I think I got about 90 seconds for the first day. And it was pretty much getting up there, testing it, learning how to put a few more twists on it. We're lucky enough to have Australian comedy legend Richard Stubbs, who's performed in front of at some absolute big gigs over the journey. He's performed for Charles and Di and Nelson Mandela and played some big rooms around the world. So he came in on Monday night, and his feedback was terrific and brutal at the same time. He did say that I'm a good speaker, and you can see how I'm an after-dinner speaker and a keynote speaker, but stand-up and comedy needs a little bit more punch and a little bit more jokes. So I sort of took that on board. And then Tuesday, it was a difficult day trying to come up with new material, and really sort of it was a bit of that awkward baby giraffe walking type of sequence. But by the end of Tuesday, I actually had my opening line to get my first laugh. So that was a win. And then I found a little bit of time Wednesday to practice it a little bit, and to go from there. And by Thursday, I sort of felt like I had it down. I had about 5 minutes. Got up on stage after a few of the previous graduates did the first half and did a terrific job of warming up the audience. Benny Horowitz again opened the second half, and then through to me. It was a terrific experience. The video will come up later this week, so if you're following my Facebook page, facebook.com/Sean Callanan Speaks, I'll definitely share it there. It's a little bit not suitable for work, so if you're going to listen to it, put the headphones in. But hopefully you get a laugh. And for people who are saying, am I now jumping into the world of comedy? Most likely not. But what I did take, one of my main takeaways was the amount of practice that I did to get the set tighter. I found really effective. Normally, because of my sort of impro background and the success that I've had using impro and being able to improvise and doing things like being able to do a presentation without speaking that I did in Miami. I rarely rehearse my keynotes. I obviously have talking points and that kind of thing. But yeah, I really took away that as a practicing, I guess, the stories and looking for nuances and potentially punching it up with jokes, but also just paying attention to that kind of thing. So yeah, probably bitten by the bug a little bit. I probably will do a few more open mic sets and find a few venues to try out more material. But it was good fun and a good challenge, and I highly recommend it if you're looking to tick something off your list, which I do. I've got a anything's possible list on SeanCallanan.com where I sort of tick off things. One of them was perform a stand-up set, so I can tick that off. So yeah, it was fun, and look forward to potentially doing it again. Just want to finish this episode on a slightly sad note. I'm going to dedicate this episode to my Auntie Kath. For those who've listened to the podcast for a long time, you would have heard my Auntie Kath rule, and that was a rule that I always stress to athletes when they're considering posting something that may be inappropriate. I always said that everyone has got an Auntie Kath in their family. It might be your nan, your grandma, or a famous or an auntie like myself. And the rule was always, if you had to show it to your Auntie Kath and explain it to your Auntie Kath, then you probably shouldn't post it. So Auntie Kath passed away at the age of 101. Absolutely amazing woman. And she'll be terribly missed by the Callanan family. So bless you, Auntie Kath, and thank you for everything you've done in supporting me in my life. The little small thing of being able to be inspired by you and to include you in what I'm doing here at Sports Geek is absolutely awesome. So until next episode, thanks again, Auntie Kath, and thank you to you for listening. Especially thank you to the people who do respond and reply and leave reviews. That pretty much is the reason I keep doing the podcast. The fact that I keep getting positive feedback. If I'm going to steal with pride, I will steal Gary V's line of your feedback and reviews are my oxygen. I agree with that. So until next episode, my name is Sean Callanan, and you've been listening to Sports Geek.
Join over 1,000 sports business executives in Sports Biz Slack. Go to sportsgeekhq.com/Slack. Please leave an iTunes review for Sports Geek. Go to sportsgeekhq.com/iTunes. Find out how to drive between $8,000 and $30,000 in profit for each digital campaign you sell sponsors. Check out sportsgeekcampaigns.com. Just like Jimmy Butler, you can call Sean anytime at 614-407-0407-200.